The boardroom erupted in chaos as security footage played on the massive screen. 24 hours earlier, nobody knew that the elegant black woman being dragged off Flight 447 in handcuffs owned the entire airline. Now, as shareholders watched their CEO's humiliation unfold, SkyWing Airlines' stock plummeted by 30% in real time. Before we dive into this incredible story of discrimination, power, and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to see how one flight attendant's prejudice led to the biggest corporate scandal of the year, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more shocking true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next when assumptions meet reality at 30,000 feet. Isabella Rodriguez Washington adjusted her simple black sweater and checked her boarding pass one final time. At 38 years old, she had built SkyWing Airlines from a regional carrier into America's fourth largest airline, but today, she traveled as just another passenger. Her designer handbag sat locked in her office safe, replaced by a worn canvas bag. Her usual first-class seat had been traded for 23B and coach. This wasn't poverty. This was strategy. Growing up in Detroit's Corktown neighborhood, Isabella learned early that success meant understanding every angle. Her Puerto Rican mother, Maria, cleaned office buildings while her black father, James, worked double shifts at Ford. They taught her that respect wasn't given, it was earned through knowledge and preparation. Mija, her mother would say, scrubbing floors in corporate towers. To lead people, you must first walk in their shoes. Isabella carried those words through community college, then Wayne State University, where she worked 3 jobs to pay tuition. Business school at Northwestern came next, funded by scholarships and student loans that took 12 years to repay. Every step taught her that assumptions could be deadly, especially for someone who looked like her. That philosophy drove her decision to conduct surprise audits of SkyWing's customer service. Once quarterly, she would fly under her maiden name, Isabella Washington, dressed like any middle-class passenger. The results always proved illuminating and sometimes devastating. She approached Gate B7 at Chicago O'Hare, observing how staff interacted with different passengers. The gate agent smiled warmly at the elderly white couple ahead of her, offering upgrade options and complimentary drinks. When Isabella stepped forward, the same agent barely looked up. "Next," the woman said curtly, scanning Isabella's boarding pass with obvious impatience. "Thank you," Isabella replied pleasantly, noting the contrast. Her mental audit had already begun. Boarding commenced 30 minutes later. Isabella watched passengers stream toward the aircraft, noticing subtle patterns in crew behavior. Flight. Attendants greeted first-class passengers with genuine smiles and personal attention. Business class received polite acknowledgement. Coach passengers got mechanical efficiency. She settled into 23B, pulling out her laptop and a folder of operational reports. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a business traveler, perhaps middle management reviewing quarterly numbers. The reality was far different. These documents contained SkyWing's most sensitive operational data, financial projections, and strategic planning materials that she had personally authored. Isabella powered up her laptop, displaying spreadsheets showing route profitability, fuel cost analyses, and customer satisfaction metrics. She began making notes about crew performance, passenger demographics, and service quality observations. Her assistant Maria Santos had booked this flight specifically because customer complaints about this route had spiked 23% in recent months. The passenger in 23A, an elderly white woman with kind eyes, glanced over and smiled. "Business trip?" she asked. "Something like that," Isabella replied, returning the smile. "I work in the airline industry." "How fascinating. I'm Eleanor Hartley. I travel quite frequently, and I must say the service standards seem to vary dramatically, depending on which crew you encounter." Isabella's attention sharpened. "Really? How so?" Mrs. Hartley leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Well, I've noticed that some crew members treat passengers very differently based on..." She paused delicately. "Appearances. It's quite troubling, actually." "That's concerning," Isabella said, making mental notes. "Have you reported these observations?" "Who would listen to one old woman's complaints?" Mrs. Hartley shrugged. Besides, proving discrimination is nearly impossible unless you're recording everything. Isabella nodded thoughtfully, unaware that Mrs. Hartley's words would prove prophetic within hours. She returned to her documents, reviewing customer service protocols that she had personally implemented. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to discover how those very policies played out when applied to someone who looked like her. The aircraft pushed back from the gate on schedule. Isabella settled in for what she assumed would be a routine 2-hour flight to Atlanta. She had no idea that her carefully planned incognito audit was about to become a national news story, or that her own employees were preparing to treat her in ways that would shock the corporate world. As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, Isabella reviewed passenger complaint data, noting patterns of dissatisfaction that correlated with crew assignments. She was particularly interested in Flight 447's crew, led by senior flight attendant Monica Stevens, whose name appeared frequently in negative feedback reports. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the ugly truth about discrimination in American aviation, and Isabella Rodriguez Washington, CEO of SkyWing Airlines, was about to experience firsthand the prejudice that her own company had failed to eliminate. Monica Stevens had worked for SkyWing Airlines for 15 years, climbing from junior crew member to senior flight attendant through what she called attention to detail. At 42, she prided herself on running a tight ship, enforcing regulations with military precision. What she didn't acknowledge, even to herself, was how her enforcement patterns varied dramatically based on passenger appearance. The service began smoothly until turbulence struck over Indiana. The aircraft lurched suddenly, sending meal trays sliding and laptops tumbling. Isabella's computer crashed to the floor, the screen spiderwebbing across one corner. She retrieved it quickly, noting with frustration that several of her financial projection spreadsheets were now barely visible through the damaged display. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened," Captain Bradley Walsh announced. "We're experiencing some moderate turbulence that should clear shortly." Isabella needed to contact her CFO about quarterly earnings projections before market close. She pulled out her phone and dialed, speaking quietly but professionally. "David, it's Isabella. The Q3 numbers look solid, but we need to discuss the fuel hedging strategy for next quarter. The operational efficiency metrics from the Chicago hub are exceeding projections by 12%. Monica Stevens, serving beverages 3 rows ahead, froze. She strained to listen as Isabella continued her conversation. "The customer satisfaction scores from our Atlanta routes need immediate attention. I want a full analysis of crew performance metrics and service delivery standards. This inconsistency is unacceptable for our brand positioning." Red flags exploded in Monica's mind. Crew performance metrics, service delivery standards, brand positioning. This passenger was discussing internal airline operations with suspicious familiarity. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Isabella more carefully. Young black woman, coach seat, casual clothes. But discussing high-level business operations with the confidence of an executive, Monica's prejudices kicked into overdrive, constructing a narrative that felt logical to her biased worldview. Corporate espionage had to be. She abandoned her beverage service and hurried to the galley, where Captain Walsh was reviewing weather reports. "Captain, we have a situation," she whispered urgently. "Passenger in 23B is conducting suspicious business calls about airline operations. She's discussing crew performance, operational metrics, financial projections. I think she might be corporate espionage." Captain Walsh, a 55-year-old veteran with his own collection of unconscious biases, looked toward Isabella's seat. "What type of passenger?" "Young black female, maybe late 30s, traveling alone in coach but discussing executive-level airline business. She has a damaged laptop covered in spreadsheets and financial documents. Very suspicious behavior." Walsh nodded grimly. "Keep monitoring. Document everything. If she continues these calls, we'll need to involve security." Monica returned to the cabin, positioning herself to eavesdrop on Isabella's conversations. When Isabella made a second call to her head of operations about route optimization and fleet utilization, Monica's suspicions crystallized into certainty. She approached Isabella's row with false professionalism, masking growing hostility. "Excuse me, miss. I need to see your identification and boarding pass." Isabella looked up, surprised. "Is there a problem?" "Routine security check. Your identification, please." Isabella handed over her driver's license, which displayed her maiden name, Isabella Washington, and a Detroit address. Monica examined it suspiciously, comparing it to the boarding pass. "You've been making business calls about airline operations. What's your connection to this industry?" "I work in aviation," Isabella replied calmly, technically telling the truth. "In what capacity?" Monica's tone grew sharper. "Operations and management," Isabella said, maintaining her composure while internally noting Monica's aggressive approach. "For which airline?" Isabella paused. Revealing her identity would compromise the audit, but Monica's hostility was escalating beyond professional inquiry. "I prefer not to discuss my employer during personal travel." Monica's eyes flashed. "Ma'am, you've been overheard discussing sensitive airline information, crew performance metrics, and operational data. I need to understand why a passenger has access to this type of confidential information." Mrs. Hartley in 23A watched the interaction with growing concern. She had observed Isabella's professional demeanor, the quality of her business materials, and the sophisticated nature of her phone conversations. Nothing about Isabella's behavior suggested impropriety, yet the flight attendant was treating her like a criminal. "Is there a supervisor I can speak with?" Isabella asked, her voice steady but firm. "I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft," Monica replied, "and I'm asking you again, what is your business discussing internal airline operations?" The confrontation was drawing attention from nearby passengers. Some pulled out phones, sensing drama unfolding. Isabella realized she was trapped between maintaining her cover and defending herself against increasingly aggressive questioning based on what she recognized as racial profiling. "I have legitimate business interests in the aviation industry," she said carefully. "I'm not required to discuss my employer or business activities with cabin crew during routine flight operations." Monica's face reddened. "Ma'am, you're being evasive about suspicious activity. I'm going to need you to explain your access to confidential airline information, or I'll be forced to involve additional security measures." The threat hung in the air as Isabella faced an impossible choice: reveal her identity and compromise her audit, or maintain her cover and face escalating discrimination from her own employee. Either way, she was about to learn exactly how SkyWing Airlines treated passengers who didn't fit their expectations. Captain Walsh appeared at Monica's shoulder, his presence adding official weight to the confrontation. "Is there a problem here?" Monica turned to him with obvious relief. This passenger has been conducting suspicious business calls about airline operations, crew performance, and confidential metrics. She's refusing to explain her access to this information. Walsh studied Isabella with cold assessment. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Walsh. I need you to explain your business activities and why you're discussing internal airline operations during this flight." Isabella looked between Monica and Walsh, recognizing that her carefully planned audit had uncovered something far more disturbing than poor customer service. She was witnessing systemic discrimination in action, and she was about to become its next victim. The irony was devastating. The CEO of SkyWing Airlines was being interrogated by her own employees for the crime of being a successful black woman who didn't match their stereotypical expectations. Air Marshal James Burton had been watching the situation develop from his seat in 15D. When Captain Walsh discreetly signaled him, Burton approached Isabella's row with the calculated calm of a federal law enforcement officer. His presence immediately transformed the atmosphere from tense to threatening. "Ma'am, I'm Federal Air Marshal Burton. I need you to accompany me to the galley for questioning." Isabella's heart rate spiked, but her expression remained composed. "What is the nature of this inquiry?" "The crew has reported suspicious activity regarding unauthorized access to airline operational information. We need to discuss this privately." Mrs. Hartley leaned forward. "Officer, I've been sitting next to this woman for an hour. She's been nothing but professional and polite. This seems highly irregular." Burton ignored her intervention. Ma'am, please gather your belongings and come with me. Isabella stood slowly, collecting her damaged laptop and business documents. As she moved toward the galley, passengers threw out. The cabin turned to watch. Many pulled out phones, sensing they were witnessing something significant. In the cramped galley space, Burton, Captain Walsh, and Monica Stevens formed an intimidating semicircle around Isabella. The questioning began immediately. "State your full name and occupation," Burton commanded. "Isabella Washington. I work in airline operations and management." "For which company?" Isabella hesitated. "I prefer not to identify my employer during personal travel," Monica interjected. "She's been making calls about crew performance metrics, operational efficiency, and financial projections. No regular passenger has access to that level of internal information." Burton examined Isabella's driver's license again. "Ms. Washington, you're traveling on personal identification, but you're discussing business matters that suggest corporate involvement. That's a red flag for potential espionage or unauthorized information gathering." "I have legitimate business interests in aviation," Isabella replied. "My conversations were with my colleagues about general industry matters." Captain Walsh stepped closer. "Ma'am, I've been flying for 30 years. I know the difference between general industry discussion and specific operational intelligence. You were discussing internal metrics, crew evaluations, and strategic planning. That information is confidential and proprietary." The accusation hit Isabella like a physical blow. Her own employees were accusing her of stealing information that she had personally created. The absurdity was overwhelming, but she recognized the dangerous position she was in. "I'm happy to explain my credentials to appropriate supervisors," she offered. "Perhaps we could contact airline management to verify my authorization to discuss these matters." Monica scoffed. "You want us to call airline executives to verify that a coach passenger has access to confidential information? That's exactly what someone engaged in corporate espionage would suggest." Burton began examining Isabella's belongings more thoroughly. Her laptop screen displayed financial spreadsheets, operational reports, and strategic planning documents bearing SkyWing's corporate logo. To someone unaware of her true identity, the materials appeared to be stolen proprietary information. "These documents contain sensitive airline data," Burton announced. "Financial projections, route analysis, competitive intelligence. How did you obtain these materials?" Isabella faced an impossible dilemma. Revealing her identity would end the discrimination she was experiencing, but it would also compromise her ability to document and address the systemic problems she was uncovering. "I have authorized access to these materials through my position in the industry," she said carefully. "What position?" Monica demanded. "You're sitting in coach, traveling under a basic economy ticket, wearing casual clothes. You don't look like someone with executive-level access to airline intelligence." The racist assumption hung in the air like poison. Isabella recognized the ugly truth behind Monica's words. In their minds, a young black woman couldn't possibly have legitimate access to high-level business information. Therefore, she must be a criminal. Mrs. Hartley had moved closer to the galley, straining to hear the conversation. When she caught fragments of the accusations, she approached the group. "Excuse me, officers. I couldn't help but notice this interrogation. I've been observing this young woman for over an hour. Her business materials appear genuine and professional. Her phone conversations were clearly legitimate business discussions. I see no evidence of suspicious activity." Monica turned on her, sharply. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. This is a security matter." "I'm a retired federal judge," Mrs. Hartley replied firmly. "I know questionable law enforcement when I see it. This appears to be harassment based on assumptions rather than evidence." Captain Walsh's face darkened. "Ma'am, you're interfering with a federal security investigation. Return to your seat immediately." Mrs. Hartley reluctantly complied, but not before making eye contact with Isabella. The brief exchange conveyed support and recognition that something fundamentally wrong was happening. Back in the galley, Burton continued his interrogation. "Ms. Washington, corporate espionage is a federal crime. If you've obtained these materials through unauthorized means, you're facing serious charges. I strongly advise you to cooperate fully. Isabella realized that her audit had revealed something far worse than poor customer service. She was witnessing her own company's culture of discrimination in its rawest form. Her employees were so convinced that a black woman couldn't legitimately possess executive-level information that they were prepared to have her arrested. Can you believe what's happening here? This successful CEO is being treated like a criminal by her own employees just because she doesn't fit their stereotypical image of a business executive. Comment number 1 if you think this kind of racial profiling is absolutely unacceptable. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking stories of discrimination and justice. What do you think Isabella should do? Should she reveal her identity to stop this nightmare, or continue documenting how her own company treats passengers who look like her? The answer to that question would determine not just Isabella's immediate fate, but the future of an entire airline corporation. I'm placing you under aircraft detention pending investigation upon landing, Burton announced. You'll be turned over to local authorities for questioning about potential corporate espionage and unauthorized possession of proprietary information. Isabella's carefully planned audit had become a federal case, and she was about to discover just how far discrimination could reach when power and prejudice aligned against someone who dared to be successful while black. Captain Walsh made the announcement that sent chills through every passenger on Flight 447. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security situation, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Nashville. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and comply with all crew instructions. The cabin erupted in nervous murmurs. Passengers began pulling out phones, recording video, and posting to social media. Within minutes, Radar Flight 447 began trending as snippets of the confrontation spread across platforms. Isabella found herself escorted back to the galley for what Burton called enhanced questioning. The small space now felt like an interrogation chamber, with 3 authority figures surrounding her while passengers watched through the galley curtain. Monica's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. "Look, we all know what's going on here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "People like you think you can just walk onto an aircraft with stolen corporate information and play games with federal officers." "People like me?" Isabella repeated, her voice steady despite the racist attack. "Don't act innocent," Monica snapped. "Young woman, coach ticket, casual clothes, but somehow you have executive-level airline intelligence. The math doesn't add up. Either you stole these documents, or someone gave them to you for industrial espionage." Captain Walsh nodded in agreement. "Ma'am, in my experience, passengers who legitimately work at executive levels in aviation don't fly coach on discount tickets. They have corporate accounts, first-class accommodations, and proper credentials. Your story has more holes than Swiss cheese." The racist assumptions were now explicit. In their worldview, a black woman couldn't possibly afford or deserve executive-level access to business intelligence. Therefore, she must be a criminal. Isabella maintained her dignity while documenting every word for the federal discrimination lawsuit that was now inevitable. "I exercise my right to remain silent until I can consult with legal counsel." Burton frowned. "Invoking your rights makes you look more suspicious. Innocent people cooperate." "Innocent people also exercise constitutional protections when facing unfounded accusations," Isabella replied. Mrs. Hartley had convinced several passengers to document the confrontation. A young black businessman in seat 15C, Marcus Johnson, attempted to intervene. "Excuse me, officers. I'm an attorney, and I'm witnessing what appears to be discriminatory treatment of a passenger based on racial profiling rather than legitimate security concerns." Monica whirled on him. "Sir, return to your seat immediately. Are you working with this woman?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Working with her? I've never seen her before in my life. I'm simply observing constitutional violations. In progress." "Another lawyer who just happens to be on this flight?" Captain Walsh said suspiciously. "This whole situation stinks of coordination." The paranoia was spreading. In their minds, successful black professionals couldn't possibly be traveling independently. There had to be a conspiracy. Burton resumed searching Isabella's belongings, spreading her documents across the galley counter. Financial reports, operational analyses, strategic planning materials, and competitive intelligence reports covered every surface. To anyone familiar with airline operations, the materials were clearly authentic and sophisticated. These documents contain proprietary information worth millions of dollars, Burton announced. Route profitability analyses, fuel hedging strategies, customer satisfaction algorithms. How does a coach passenger obtain this level of corporate intelligence? Through legitimate employment in the aviation industry, Isabella replied calmly. Monica laughed bitterly. Right. And I suppose you just forgot to mention that you're secretly a corporate executive? The irony was so perfect that Isabella almost smiled. I don't discuss my employer or position during personal travel. Because you don't have one, Monica shouted. You're a corporate spy, and we caught you red-handed with stolen information. Burton made the decision that would transform a discrimination incident into a national scandal. I'm officially placing you under federal detention for suspected corporate espionage. Upon landing, you'll be arrested and charged with unauthorized possession of proprietary information and potential violations of the Economic Espionage Act. Passengers throughout the cabin were now openly recording. The hashtag, #Airline discrimination, joined Dashur Flight 447 in trending status. Videos of Isabella being interrogated by 3 white authority figures while maintaining perfect composure spread across social platforms. Mrs. Hartley stood up despite crew orders to remain seated. This is outrageous. I've been watching this woman for 2 hours. She's conducted herself with perfect professionalism. You're treating her like a criminal because she's black and successful. This is exactly the kind of discrimination I've witnessed on airlines for years. Ma'am, sit down or you'll be detained as well, Captain Walsh threatened. I'm 73 years old and a retired federal judge, Mrs. Hartley replied. Detain me for what? Witnessing civil rights violations? The confrontation escalated beyond crew control. Passengers were openly supporting Isabella, documenting the discrimination and posting real-time updates to social media. The story was spreading faster than SkyWing's corporate communications team could track. Isabella remained silent as the aircraft descended toward Nashville, but her mind was already crafting the response that would reshape American aviation. Her employees had just provided devastating evidence of systemic discrimination, and she had witnessed firsthand how her own company treated passengers who didn't match their stereotypical expectations. The plane touched down at Nashville International Airport as emergency vehicles and federal agents waited on the tarmac. Isabella Rodriguez Washington, CEO of SkyWing Airlines, was about to be arrested by federal authorities for possessing her own company's confidential information. As passengers deplaned around her, many stopped to express support. Mrs. Hartley pressed a business card into Isabella's hand. Call me when this nightmare ends, she whispered. You'll need witnesses. Marcus Johnson did the same. I'm documenting everything for the civil rights lawsuit. This is the most egregious case of racial profiling I've ever witnessed. Isabella was escorted off the aircraft in handcuffs, while passengers recorded her dignified walk through the jet bridge. She had begun this flight as a CEO conducting a routine audit. She was ending it as the victim of discrimination so severe that it would soon dominate national headlines and trigger congressional investigations into airline industry practices. The most powerful irony remained unknown to everyone watching. The woman being arrested for corporate espionage owned the very airline that was destroying her life. Nashville International Airport's federal detention facility had processed many unusual cases, but arresting a suspected corporate spy carrying proprietary airline intelligence ranked among the most serious. Isabella sat in processing, maintaining her dignity, while federal agents photographed her belongings and documented evidence. Detective Sarah Martinez of the Metro Nashville Police Department arrived to coordinate with federal authorities. Unlike the airline crew, Martinez approached the case with professional skepticism, noting inconsistencies in the arrest report. Let me understand this, Martinez said, reviewing Burton's paperwork. Flight crew suspected corporate espionage because a passenger was discussing airline operations on business calls? Correct, Burton replied. She had proprietary documents, financial projections, Operational intelligence. Clear indicators of unauthorized access to confidential information. Martinez examined Isabella's belongings spread across the evidence table. The materials were sophisticated, professionally produced, and bore official SkyWing corporate logos. But something felt wrong about the entire scenario. "Has anyone verified whether this woman actually works in the airline industry?" Martinez asked. "She claims to work in operations and management, but refuses to identify her employer," Burton explained. Classic espionage behavior. Martinez studied Isabella's driver's license, credit cards, and personal effects. Everything suggested a professional woman with substantial financial resources. Her laptop, though damaged, was high-end equipment loaded with business software. Her credentials didn't match the profile of a typical corporate spy. Meanwhile, Isabella's lawyer, David Chen, was racing through Nashville traffic after receiving a cryptic phone call from his most important client. Isabella had simply said, "David, I'm in federal custody in Nashville. Corporate espionage charges. Come immediately." Chen specialized in corporate law and had represented Isabella through SkyWing's IPO and major acquisitions. He knew her well enough to recognize that something extraordinary had occurred. At the detention facility, Chen demanded immediate access to his client. "I'm David Chen, representing Isabella Washington. I want to see her immediately." "She's being processed for federal charges," the desk sergeant explained. "Corporate espionage, unauthorized possession of proprietary information. This isn't a simple traffic violation." Chen's mind raced. Isabella Washington? His client's legal name was Isabella Rodriguez Washington, CEO of SkyWing Airlines. Why was she using her maiden name and facing espionage charges? Back in the interrogation room, Detective Martinez continued her investigation with growing skepticism. She had interviewed Monica Stevens and Captain Walsh separately, and their stories contained troubling inconsistencies. The flight attendant claims the suspect was aggressively discussing confidential information, Martinez noted. But passenger witnesses describe quiet, professional phone conversations. The captain says she was evasive and suspicious, but the federal judge sitting next to her describes completely normal business behavior. Burton shifted uncomfortably. Sometimes witnesses misinterpret what they observe. Or sometimes law enforcement makes assumptions based on appearance rather than evidence, Martinez replied pointedly. Isabella's fingerprints and background check revealed a spotless record and sophisticated professional history. Her credit report showed substantial assets, executive-level income, and financial patterns consistent with C-suite executive status. Nothing suggested criminal activity or desperate circumstances that might motivate corporate espionage. Chen finally reached Isabella after 3 hours of bureaucratic obstacles. When he saw her in the interrogation room, his confusion deepened. "Isabella, what happened? Why are you using your maiden name? And why are federal agents treating you like a corporate spy?" Isabella looked exhausted but maintained her composure. "David, I was conducting an incognito audit of customer service quality. My own employees accused me of corporate espionage because they couldn't believe a black woman could legitimately possess executive-level airline intelligence." Chen's jaw dropped. "They arrested the CEO of SkyWing Airlines for possessing SkyWing's proprietary information?" "They don't know who I am," Isabella explained. "I was traveling under my maiden name as part of the audit. The discrimination was so severe that revealing my identity seemed less important than documenting the systemic problems." Chen immediately understood the implications. "Isabella, this isn't just discrimination. This is a federal case that's about to become a national scandal. SkyWing stock is probably already reacting to social media coverage." He was right. Flight 447 and airline discrimination were trending globally. Videos of Isabella's arrest had been viewed millions of times. Financial markets were reacting to what appeared to be a major discrimination lawsuit against SkyWing Airlines. Isabella made her one aloud phone call to her assistant Maria Santos. "Maria, it's Isabella. I need you to document everything about today's incident, but don't reveal my identity yet. Let the investigation proceed naturally. And prepare crisis communications protocols. This situation is about to explode." Maria's voice was tense. Isabella, the stock is down 18%. Social media is calling for boycotts. The board is demanding emergency meetings. What do you want me to tell them? Tell them that SkyWing's CEO is personally investigating customer service quality, and the results are more revealing than anyone expected. Detective Martinez completed her investigation with growing certainty that a massive injustice had occurred. The evidence against Isabella was circumstantial at best, while the evidence of racial profiling was overwhelming. She approached Isabella's cell with an unusual request. Ms. Washington, I've reviewed this case thoroughly. The charges against you appear to be based on assumptions rather than evidence. Would you be willing to clarify your actual position in the airline industry? Isabella smiled for the first time in hours. Detective, I appreciate your professionalism. My attorney will provide appropriate documentation of my credentials and authorization to possess those materials. Martinez nodded. I suspected as much. This has all the hallmarks of discrimination disguised as security enforcement. As evening approached, Isabella remained in federal custody, while Chen worked frantically to secure her release. Neither realized that SkyWing's corporate security team was frantically trying to understand why their CEO's travel had ended in federal arrest, or that the discrimination incident was about to trigger the largest corporate accountability crisis in aviation history. The irony remained perfect and devastating. Isabella Rodriguez Washington, who had built an airline empire through talent and determination, was spending the night in jail for the crime of being successful while black. Detective Martinez's investigation took on new urgency as inconsistencies in the crew's story multiplied. She interviewed passengers separately, and their accounts painted a disturbing picture of discrimination disguised as security enforcement. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley proved to be a crucial witness, providing detailed observations with the credibility of a retired federal judge. Detective, I observed this woman for 2 hours. Her business materials were clearly legitimate. Her phone conversations were professional, and her behavior was exemplary. The crew's treatment of her was discriminatory from the beginning. Marcus Johnson, the attorney who had attempted to intervene, provided additional evidence. I've prosecuted civil rights cases for 15 years. This was textbook racial profiling. They assumed criminal activity because a black woman possessed sophisticated business information. Martinez pulled Monica Stevens's personnel file and discovered a troubling pattern. Over 5 years, Monica had filed suspicious activity reports about minority passengers at rates significantly higher than statistical probability would suggest. Her reports consistently involved passengers of color engaging in normal business activities. Captain Walsh's record revealed even more concerning information. 3 formal complaints about discriminatory behavior had been filed against him, all involving passengers of color. Each case had been quietly settled by airline management with non-disclosure agreements. Meanwhile, Chen was building Isabella's defense case while maintaining secrecy about her true identity. He subpoenaed flight recordings, security footage, and passenger testimony. The evidence overwhelmingly supported claims of discrimination. Detective Martinez, Chen said during their meeting. My client works at the highest levels of airline management. She has authorized access to every document found in her possession. This entire case is based on racist assumptions about who can legitimately hold executive positions. Martinez nodded. I've reached similar conclusions. The question is whether federal prosecutors will acknowledge the obvious. Social media. Pressure intensified hourly. The justice for Isabella dominated trending topics as celebrities, politicians, and civil rights leaders demanded answers. The video footage from Flight 447 had been shared millions of times, creating a public relations nightmare for SkyWing Airlines. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley tweeted, "The treatment of Isabella Washington represents everything wrong with discrimination in corporate America. A black woman faces federal charges for being successful. This is 2024. Not 1954. SkyWing stock continued falling as institutional investors fled over discrimination concerns. The company's legal team found themselves fighting multiple fronts as passenger lawsuits multiplied and regulatory agencies launched investigations. Chen filed emergency motions demanding Isabella's immediate release. citing lack of evidence and clear constitutional violations. His briefs carefully avoided revealing her true identity while establishing her legitimate access to the disputed materials. Your Honor, Chen argued before federal magistrate Judge Patricia Williams, my client is being prosecuted for possessing materials she obtained through legitimate employment in the airline industry. The real issue is whether federal law enforcement should arrest successful black professionals based on stereotypical assumptions about their capabilities. Judge Williams reviewed the evidence with growing skepticism about the government's case. Isabella's background check revealed executive-level credentials, substantial assets, and sophisticated business experience. The materials in her possession, while proprietary, showed no evidence of theft or unauthorized access. Aviation authorities launched parallel investigations into SkyWing's crew training and discrimination policies. The Federal Aviation Administration announced reviews of customer service protocols and anti-discrimination enforcement across the industry. Detective Martinez completed her investigation with damning conclusions about the crew's conduct. Her report documented a clear pattern of discriminatory enforcement, racial profiling, and constitutional violations. The evidence shows that Ms. Washington was targeted for enhanced scrutiny based solely on racial assumptions, Martinez wrote. Crew members admitted they found it suspicious that a black woman could legitimately possess executive-level business information. This represents systemic discrimination that violates federal civil rights laws. Chen prepared to reveal Isabella's true identity strategically, timing the disclosure for maximum impact on both the legal case and corporate accountability. He coordinated with Isabella's assistant Maria Santos to ensure that SkyWing's board would learn their CEO's identity simultaneously with the public revelation. Mrs. Hartley provided additional support by reaching out to media contacts, describing the discrimination she had witnessed. Her credibility as a retired federal judge gave weight to accusations that might otherwise be dismissed. I've seen discrimination in many forms throughout my career, she told CNN. But watching a successful black woman treated like a criminal for possessing legitimate business materials was one of the most egregious examples I've encountered. Now here's what I want to know from all of you watching this incredible story unfold. Do you think Detective Martinez will find enough evidence to expose this discrimination completely? Comment number 1 if you believe the truth is about to come out. And don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for the conclusion of this shocking story. Can you imagine being arrested for being too successful while black? The next part of this story will blow your mind when Isabella's true identity is finally revealed. Aviation industry observers recognized that the case was becoming a watershed moment for corporate accountability and discrimination enforcement. If Isabella's treatment represented systemic problems within airline culture, the regulatory and legal consequences would reshape the industry. The investigation was revealing that Flight 447's crew had committed multiple federal violations while assuming they were protecting national security. Their racist assumptions had transformed routine business activity into a federal case, and the evidence was about to destroy their careers while vindicating their victim. Isabella remained in custody, but Chen's legal strategy was positioning her for complete vindication and massive corporate accountability. The discrimination case was about to become a criminal justice reform story, and SkyWing Airlines was about to learn the true cost of prejudice in the executive suite. SkyWing Airlines' headquarters in Atlanta erupted in crisis management mode as social media coverage of Flight 447 reached critical mass. Board Chairman Robert Sterling convened an emergency meeting as the company's stock price continued its devastating decline. Gentlemen, we have a situation that threatens the company's existence, Sterling announced to the assembled executives. Videos of our crew arresting a black passenger for corporate espionage are trending globally. Our stock is down 42%, and discrimination lawsuits are being filed hourly. Chief Legal Officer Amanda Richardson reviewed the mounting legal challenges. We're facing federal civil rights investigations, passenger lawsuits, and potential congressional hearings. The crew's behavior on Flight 447 appears to constitute clear racial profiling. Meanwhile, Company Security Director Thomas Wright was conducting his own investigation into the incident. As he reviewed Isabella's booking information, red flags began appearing that had nothing to do with criminal activity. This doesn't make sense, Wright muttered, studying his computer screen. The passenger was booked through our executive travel services, but she was traveling under a different name than the account holder. Wright's security clearance allowed him access to confidential booking systems. When he cross-referenced Isabella, Washington with SkyWing's internal databases, his blood ran cold. "Oh my God," he whispered, staring at the screen. The booking had been made by Maria Santos, executive assistant to CEO Isabella Rodriguez Washington. The passenger wasn't a corporate spy. She was their boss. Wright's discovery came as Detective Martinez was finalizing her investigation with devastating conclusions about crew conduct. Her report documented systematic discrimination that violated multiple federal laws. The crew's assumptions about Ms. Washington's legitimacy were based solely on racial stereotypes, Martinez concluded. They couldn't conceive that a black woman could legitimately possess executive-level business intelligence. Isabella's true credentials were emerging through Chen's careful legal strategy. Court filings revealed her education at Northwestern's, Kellogg School of Management, her previous executive positions, and her sophisticated business background. The woman accused of corporate espionage was clearly a legitimate airline industry executive. Aviation regulatory agencies intensified their investigations as the discrimination allegations gained credibility. The Department of Transportation announced reviews of airline customer service protocols and anti-discrimination enforcement. Social media pressure reached unprecedented levels as celebrities and politicians demanded justice for Isabella. The hashtag #MyResearchCEOHeilBlack emerged as users shared stories of successful black professionals facing discrimination. Sterling called right into his office as the crisis deepened. "Thomas, what's your assessment of this situation? How bad is it really?" Wright took a deep breath. "Sir, it's worse than we imagined. Much worse." "How much worse?" "The passenger they arrested owns this airline." Sterling's face went white. "What are you talking about?" Wright opened his laptop, displaying the booking information and corporate records. Isabella Washington is Isabella Rodriguez Washington. Our CEO was conducting an incognito audit when our crew had her arrested for possessing her own company's proprietary information. The revelation hit Sterling like a physical blow. "Are you telling me that our employees arrested their own boss for corporate espionage?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And it gets worse. The discrimination was so severe that she chose to remain in custody rather than reveal her identity. She wanted to document how we treat passengers who look like her." Sterling realized the implications immediately. This wasn't just a discrimination case, it was corporate suicide. The CEO of SkyWing Airlines had been victimized by her own company's culture of racism, and the evidence was spreading across global media. "We need to get her out of custody immediately," Sterling said urgently. "Sir, she's in federal detention. We can't just call and ask for her release. And based on what I'm seeing in the legal filings, she's building a case that will destroy us." Richardson received updates about Chen's legal strategy and recognized the sophisticated planning behind Isabella's approach. "She's not just documenting discrimination," Richardson realized. "She's building evidence for a corporate transformation that will reshape the entire airline industry." Congressional pressure mounted as Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Hakeem Jeffries demanded hearings about airline discrimination. "The treatment of Isabella Washington represents systemic racism in corporate America," Jeffries declared. "Congress must investigate how airlines treat successful black professionals." Wright attempted to contact Isabella through legal channels, but was blocked by ongoing federal proceedings. Chen had constructed legal barriers that prevented SkyWing from interfering with the discrimination case. "She's playing chess while we're playing checkers," Wright observed. "Every move has been calculated to expose our company's problems while positioning her for complete vindication." The board meeting continued in crisis mode as executives realized the magnitude of their situation. Monica Stevens and Captain Walsh had unknowingly destroyed their own careers while providing evidence that would trigger industry-wide reforms. "How do we fix this?" Sterling asked desperately. "We can't," Richardson replied. "Our CEO has documented systematic discrimination, using herself as evidence. When her identity is revealed, every assumption about corporate leadership and racial bias will be challenged. Media coverage intensified as investigative journalists uncovered Monica's pattern of discriminatory incident reports and Walsh's history of customer complaints. The crew's behavior wasn't an isolated incident but part of a systemic problem. Wright's investigation revealed additional disturbing patterns. Minority passengers were disproportionately subject to security scrutiny, service complaints, and upgrade denials. Isabella's audit had uncovered institutional racism that extended far beyond one flight crew. "Sir," Wright reported to Sterling, "this goes deeper than Flight 447. We have systemic discrimination problems throughout our operations. Ms. Rodriguez-Washington has probably been documenting these issues for months." Sterling realized that Isabella's arrest wasn't the beginning of their crisis. It was the climactic revelation of an investigation that had been building toward this moment. Their CEO had set a trap that exposed everything wrong with their corporate culture. As evening approached, SkyWing's stock price had fallen 58% from its morning open. Institutional investors were fleeing over discrimination concerns, and employees were questioning their company's values. The corporate panic was justified. Isabella Rodriguez-Washington had orchestrated the most devastating exposure of airline discrimination in aviation history, and she had done it by allowing her own employees to treat her exactly how they treated other successful black passengers. The revelation of her true identity would transform a discrimination case into a corporate accountability revolution that would reshape American business culture forever. Thomas Wright burst into Robert Sterling's office without knocking, his face ashen with panic. "Sir, we have a catastrophic situation. We need to contact our legal team immediately and prepare for complete corporate restructuring." Sterling looked up from his phone, where he was monitoring SkyWing's stock price in real time. "Thomas, it can't get much worse than this. We're facing federal investigations, congressional hearings, and our stock has lost 60% of its value." "It can get infinitely worse," Wright replied, opening his laptop. "The passenger our crew arrested for corporate espionage is Isabella Rodriguez-Washington. Our CEO has been in federal custody for 18 hours because our employees couldn't believe a black woman could legitimately own an airline." The silence in Sterling's office was deafening. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's skyline stretched endlessly, but Sterling could only stare at the screen displaying his CEO's mugshot alongside her corporate headshot. "Dear God," Sterling whispered, "how is this possible?" She was conducting an incognito customer service audit. "Our crew's discrimination was so severe that she chose to remain in custody rather than reveal her identity. She's been documenting systemic racism using herself as evidence." Sterling's phone rang immediately. Richardson calling from the legal department. "Robert, we have a situation that threatens the company's existence," Richardson said urgently. Chen just filed papers revealing Isabella's true identity. The CEO of SkyWing Airlines spent the night in federal custody for possessing her own company's proprietary information. "We need to get her out immediately," Sterling said. "She doesn't want out," Richardson replied. "Her legal strategy is brilliant and devastating. She's documented federal civil rights violations while exposing corporate culture that enabled the discrimination. When this story breaks, it will dominate international headlines." Detective Martinez completed her investigation with recommendations for federal civil rights charges against the crew. Her report concluded that Isabella had been victimized by systematic racial profiling disguised as security enforcement. Ms. Rodriguez-Washington was targeted solely because crew members couldn't conceive that a black woman could legitimately possess executive-level business intelligence, Martinez wrote. Their assumptions violated multiple federal laws and demonstrate institutional discrimination. Chen strategically released Isabella's identity to media outlets, timing the revelation for maximum impact. CNN received exclusive access to the story, with Anderson Cooper preparing a special report on the CEO who was arrested by her own employees. The story exploded across global media simultaneously. SkyWing CEO arrested by own staff for being black and successful dominated headlines from New York to London to Tokyo. The discrimination case had become an international symbol of corporate racism. Sterling convened an emergency board meeting, as shareholders demanded immediate action. Ladies and gentlemen, our CEO has exposed systematic discrimination within our company by allowing our employees to arrest her. This is unprecedented in corporate history. Monica Stevens and Captain Walsh learned about Isabella's true identity through news coverage while facing federal civil rights charges. The revelation that they had discriminated against their ultimate boss added criminal stupidity to their civil rights violations. "I want to see a lawyer," Monica told Detective Martinez upon learning the truth. "This is impossible. She was just a passenger and coach. She was the CEO of the airline conducting a customer service audit," Martinez replied. "Your racist assumptions blinded you to obvious evidence of her legitimacy." Congressional leaders demanded immediate hearings. Speaker of the House Hakeem Jeffries announced investigations into airline discrimination. When a CEO can be arrested by her own employees for being successful while black, we have systemic problems that require federal intervention. Isabella's first public statement came through Chen, who read it to assembled media outside the federal courthouse. "I founded SkyWing Airlines to create opportunities for all Americans regardless of background. Yesterday, I discovered that my own company had failed to live up to those values. The discrimination I experienced was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of cultural problems that require immediate correction." President Biden issued a statement calling for corporate accountability. Isabella Rodriguez Washington's treatment represents the barriers that successful Americans of color continue to face. Her courage in documenting this discrimination will drive necessary changes across corporate America. SkyWing's stock price collapsed completely as trading was suspended. Institutional investors fled over discrimination concerns, while employees questioned their company's leadership and values. Sterling appeared before the board with a comprehensive response plan. "We're implementing immediate reforms, mandatory anti-discrimination training, zero-tolerance policies, and independent oversight of customer service protocols. We're also establishing a compensation fund for discrimination victims." Aviation industry leaders recognized the case as a watershed moment. United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby announced industry-wide reviews of discrimination policies. Isabella Rodriguez Washington's experience demonstrates that aviation must confront unconscious bias and institutional racism. Isabella emerged from federal custody to massive media attention, maintaining her dignity while addressing the discrimination she had documented. "This experience taught me that success doesn't protect anyone from racism. We must create systems that ensure dignity for all passengers regardless of appearance or assumptions." Mrs. Hartley attended Isabella's press conference, providing witness testimony about the crew's behavior. "I watched this woman being treated like a criminal for being professional and successful. It was discrimination in its purest form." Marcus Johnson announced plans for a class action lawsuit representing passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. Isabella's case provides evidence of systematic racism that has affected thousands of travelers. The revelation transformed Isabella from discrimination victim to corporate accountability champion. Her strategic documentation of the incident provided evidence for sweeping reforms across the airline industry. Monica Stevens and Captain Walsh faced federal civil rights charges, termination from SkyWing, and permanent bans from aviation employment. Their careers were destroyed by racist assumptions that they had never questioned. As news coverage reached global proportions, Isabella's story became a symbol of both ongoing discrimination and the power of strategic resistance. She had transformed her victimization into evidence for systemic change that would protect future passengers from similar treatment. The CEO who had built an airline empire was about to rebuild it with justice as its foundation, using her own discrimination as the catalyst for industry-wide transformation. 6 months after Flight 447, Isabella Rodriguez Washington stood before the largest gathering in SkyWing Airlines' history. Every employee, from ground crew to executives, was mandatory attendance as she addressed the discrimination that had nearly destroyed her company. On that March afternoon, Isabella began, her voice carrying across the Atlanta headquarters auditorium. "I boarded Flight 447 as your CEO conducting a routine audit. I deplaned in handcuffs as a victim of the very discrimination I had failed to prevent. The silence was absolute. Monica Stevens and Captain Walsh had been terminated within hours of Isabella's identity revelation, facing federal civil rights charges that would result in significant prison sentences. Their careers were finished, their actions serving as cautionary tales throughout the aviation industry. I could have revealed my identity and ended my ordeal immediately, Isabella continued. Instead, I chose to document the complete experience that thousands of our passengers have endured simply for being successful while black, brown, or different from stereotypical expectations. Detective Martinez received commendations for her thorough investigation and unbiased handling of the case. Her report had provided federal prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of systematic discrimination, leading to industry-wide reforms. Chen's discrimination lawsuit resulted in the largest settlement in airline history, establishing precedents for corporate accountability that extended far beyond aviation. The case became required study material in business schools and civil rights law programs. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley received personal gratitude from Isabella, along with lifetime platinum status and a seat on SkyWing's newly created Passenger Rights Advisory Board. Her credible witness testimony had provided crucial evidence for the discrimination case. Mrs. Hartley's courage in speaking truth to power exemplifies the allyship we need to eliminate discrimination, Isabella announced, presenting her with a special recognition award. Isabella implemented comprehensive reforms that transformed SkyWing into the industry's diversity and inclusion leader. Mandatory anti-bias training became standard, with crew members required to complete quarterly assessments. Customer service protocols were rewritten to eliminate subjective decision-making that enabled discrimination. Marcus Johnson joined SkyWing's legal team, leading the company's civil rights compliance efforts. His class action lawsuit had identified over 200 passengers who experienced similar discrimination, resulting in individual settlements and systematic policy changes. "We're not just preventing future discrimination," Johnson explained during a company-wide training session. "We're creating an inclusive culture that celebrates diversity rather than viewing it with suspicion." The Federal Aviation Administration adopted SkyWing's reformed policies as industry standards, requiring all airlines to implement similar anti-discrimination measures. Congressional hearings led by Representatives Presley and Jeffries resulted in federal legislation strengthening civil rights enforcement in transportation. Isabella's story became an international symbol of corporate accountability and strategic resistance to institutional racism. Harvard Business School developed a case study analyzing her leadership during the crisis, focusing on how she transformed personal victimization into systemic change. The Rodriguez-Washington case became required reading for executives across all industries, demonstrating how unconscious bias could destroy corporate value while harming individuals and communities. 6 months after her arrest, Isabella returned to the same route, flying coach from Chicago to Atlanta under her maiden name. This time, the crew's behavior was exemplary, treating every passenger with dignity and professionalism. The flight attendant, a young Latina woman named Carmen Rodriguez, approached Isabella's seat with genuine warmth. "Ms. Washington, is there anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable?" Isabella smiled, recognizing the transformation in corporate culture. "Thank you, Carmen. The service has been outstanding." Carmen had been hired as part of SkyWing's diversity initiative, joining hundreds of new employees recruited specifically to bring varied perspectives to airline operations. The crew's composition now reflected America's diversity rather than perpetuating historical exclusion. As the aircraft descended into Atlanta, Isabella reflected on the journey from victimization to vindication. Her arrest had triggered the largest corporate accountability movement in aviation history, but the personal cost had been significant. "The discrimination I experienced was real and devastating," she had testified before Congress, "but it provided evidence for changes that will protect millions of future passengers from similar treatment." SkyWing's stock price had not only recovered but reached record highs as investors recognized that diversity initiatives drove innovation and customer satisfaction. The company became the industry's most valuable airline, proving that justice was also good business. Monica Stevens received an 18-month federal prison sentence for civil rights violations, serving as a warning to airline employees throughout the industry. Her case demonstrated that discrimination carried serious personal consequences beyond employment termination. Captain Walsh lost his pilot license permanently and faced multiple discrimination lawsuits from passengers he had previously victimized. His 20-year career ended in disgrace, his pension forfeited due to federal civil rights violations. Their actions remind us that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, Isabella explained during a diversity conference. It's criminally prosecuted and professionally devastating for those who perpetrate it. The transformation extended beyond SkyWing as other airlines scrambled to implement similar reforms. United, Delta, American, and Southwest all adopted enhanced anti-discrimination policies, recognizing that the industry faced heightened scrutiny following Isabella's case. International airlines requested consultations about implementing SkyWing's diversity protocols, spreading the reforms globally. The discrimination that began on Flight 447 ultimately triggered worldwide changes in aviation customer service. As Isabella concluded her company address, she issued a challenge that would define SkyWing's future. "We will never again mistake success for suspicion, professionalism for threat, or diversity for danger. This airline will lead America toward the inclusive future our founders envisioned." The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes as employees recognized their company's transformation from discrimination enabler to civil rights leader. Isabella had turned her worst professional experience into her greatest leadership achievement. What do you think about Isabella's incredible journey from discrimination victim to corporate accountability champion? Her story proves that even the most powerful people aren't immune to racism, but strategic resistance can create lasting change. Comment below and tell us about times you've witnessed or experienced discrimination. Hit that like button if you believe corporate accountability is essential for justice. Subscribe for more stories of courage overcoming prejudice, and share this video to spread awareness about ongoing civil rights challenges. Isabella's courage in documenting her own victimization created protections for millions of future travelers. Sometimes the most powerful leadership comes from those willing to experience injustice to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Thank you for watching this incredible story of transformation. And remember that each of us has the power to challenge discrimination and create positive change in our communities and workplaces. Isabella's extraordinary experience reveals profound truths about discrimination in corporate America. Success, education, and achievement don't shield anyone from racial bias when prejudice runs deep within institutional culture. Her story demonstrates that stereotypes about who deserves executive positions remain dangerously prevalent, even in 2024. The most powerful lesson involves strategic resistance. Isabella chose documentation over immediate vindication, transforming personal victimization into evidence for systemic change. Her approach proved that sometimes experiencing injustice completely provides the strongest foundation for preventing future discrimination. Corporate accountability requires constant vigilance. SkyWing's discrimination wasn't isolated misconduct, but reflected widespread cultural problems that enabled racist assumptions to flourish unchecked. Isabella's reforms demonstrate that meaningful change demands comprehensive policy transformation, not superficial training programs. Leadership during crisis defines true character. Isabella maintained dignity while facing false accusations, choosing long-term justice over short-term comfort. Her strategic thinking converted catastrophic discrimination into industry-wide transformation that protected millions of future travelers. The story proves that discrimination costs everyone. SkyWing's stock collapse, federal investigations, and damaged reputation illustrate how prejudice destroys corporate value while harming individuals and communities. Justice ultimately became profitable when diversity initiatives drove innovation and customer satisfaction. Most importantly, Isabella's courage reminds us that challenging discrimination requires personal risk, but creates lasting protection for others who follow.